This is Lift, the podcast, where we interview luminaries of our time to uplift, inspire, and mobilize us in interesting times. I'll be your host. My name is Katya Slivinskaya. I have a very special guest for you today. Her name is Kat Courtney. Kat has been a shamanic guide who's trained for 14 years, over 14 years, working with the plant called ayahuasca and the brew that is made from this plant in the Amazon basin. Now, this plant, ayahuasca, has been used throughout the Amazon basin for a very, very long time. We don't exactly know how long, but we know that it's been used throughout by indigenous cultures to deepen our connection with our life purpose, our calling, and ultimately our soul, and receive guidance from within. Now, Kat herself has done over 1,200, hundreds and hundreds of ceremonies with ayahuasca, and she now leads these ceremonies in places like Peru and Costa Rica, where ayahuasca is legal and welcomed. Along with facilitating the actual work, she has also engaged and continues to do a form of work that she calls afterlife coaching, which is a process in part of guiding people through the integration process of integrating the powerful and life-changing lessons that they receive from their work in the ayahuasca ceremonies. Now, her afterlife coaching work also includes taking people through shadow work, guiding them through dark nights of the soul, and even helping them to embrace and become more intimate with the processes of death and dying that are still very taboo in some ways in our culture, in our Western culture, shall I say. Now, if you have ever wondered about ayahuasca, wondered if it was for you, if you've ever wondered what the experience was like, or why it's illegal still in many places, whether it's safe, we will discuss all of this and more in the episode today. So please enjoy this episode with the incredible, profound, authentic, and real Kat Courtney, and I'll see you on the other side of this episode. Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Lift the podcast. Welcome, Kat Courtney.
Thank you, Katya. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
It's great to have you. What an honor. So let's talk about your background first. I know you've talked about this hundreds of times, but it's so fascinating. And before you began your path with ayahuasca, you had all the markers of success, as we would think of them in our modern culture. And at the same time, you were still struggling severely. So can you tell us about that?
Honestly, the fact that my external world, the good job, I had a famous partner, like the fact that that was markers of success made the fact that I was unhappy all the more poignant and painful. Yeah. I mean, really what was happening is in a very generic way, I was focusing on my external world and it showed, and not giving much to my emotional healing, my spiritual path, not doing a whole lot for that. And that showed. So I was just really lost and unhappy and doing what I thought needed to be done rather than living my life, being who I wanted to be. It's not uncommon, right?
No. And so how did that show up for you?
Well, it was the first thing the medicine made me aware of. When I went to the jungle to drink ayahuasca for the first time, which was 14 years ago, the first thing, not the first thing, but one of the first things I remember her saying is basically like feeling this awareness of what a lovely life you have. It's too bad you don't love it.
Mm-hmm. And so let's back up just a little bit before you actually went. How was it showing up? I know that you were actually struggling with, you know, um, with certain things. Can you just tell us about how that was showing up?
Sure, I was self-medicating like most of us do. So drinking way too much alcohol every single day, just focused on the next drink so that I didn't have to feel. In
Mm,
a dysfunctional relationship. I mean, a beautiful man. I can love him now from a distance, but really dysfunctional.
mhm,
uh, and recreational drug use, going out, doing a lot of ecstasy, doing things that would basically like just take me away from myself. Rather than go further in, I wanted as far out as I could get. And I was diagnosed bipolar and, just like I felt broken, to be perfectly honest. Yeah.
mhm, mhm. So it sounds like your everyday experience of life was not something that was comfortable to sit with or sit inside of.
No, full of anxiety, like intense anxiety, of being, because I knew I was kind of not authentic. I knew that, but I didn't know how to be authentic. But I still judged myself for, and of course, the drinking and everything. Nobody, no, everyone knows that's not a healthy way to be. I was also bulimic. Forgot that point. That was a really big one. That I was trying to self-medicate with food, and then I felt guilty for it. So then I would throw up. Vicious cycle. I know all these things are bad, and nobody knew any of this. I was functioning on all levels, which makes it even worse in a way because I'm suffering all by myself of thinking what a horrible person I am. And yeah, and so I was well aware of all of those things. Honestly, I just didn't know what to do about it. I had no idea where to begin to heal, which is
Mhm.
where ayahuasca came in, of course. Yeah.
Mm. Okay, so would you tell us what is ayahuasca?
I don't know. That's a big question. What I do know is she's a tea from the jungle, right? It's a tea made of two plants. One ayahuasca, which is a vine, a beautiful, like snake-like vine,
Mhm.
and it's when combined with usually a plant called chakruna, or chakrapunga is another one, which has DMT in it, which is an alkaloid that we have in our bodies that allows us to have out of body experiences like visions and such. So those two plants are condensed down into a tea, and the consciousness of the plants come with it, which for me anyway, was a really weird concept. At the time, I couldn't keep a house plant alive, let alone even think that plants had consciousness and that I could communicate with them. Now I know that's true. And so in a sense, that's what ayahuasca is. And it's a plant brew that's been used by the South American shamanic tribes for thousands of years for understanding consciousness, for healing.
Mm. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like in context in the tribes in the Amazon that actually use this plant? Is it, what kind of, yeah, how does it look in context?
It's actually changed dramatically in the last handful of decades because of us Westerners.
Mm,
In really before the 60s, the way that the indigenous tribes worked with ayahuasca is there was a medicine man or a medicine woman that you would go to if you were ailing physically or emotionally or spiritually, and they would drink the medicine. Only the shaman, the medicine person, would drink the medicine, journey on your behalf, do work on your body, and come back maybe with some like advice on, hey, the medicine told me you should be meditating or whatever it is, right?
mhm,
When the Westerners started going down, we didn't want to just accept the middleman. So in the 60s, people started coming down and wanting to have the experience themselves. So it's only been, what we're looking at like 50, 60 years where the participants also drink ayahuasca in addition to the medicine practitioner. That's relatively new.
Fascinating. And how do you think that's gone over with the actual medicine men and women in these traditions?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, overall, honestly, because I've been blessed to train down there, they are so welcoming of
Mm,
like, we are welcome to come and drink of this amazing medicine to heal. I mean, they view that we deserve it as much as anybody, right? There's no separation. The difficulty is that because the indigenous tribes their everyday lives are so different than ours. They're so connected to nature.
Yeah.
They're so not a part of all of this overstimulation and consumerism, that what I found is that the practitioner had, the shaman, have a hard time really understanding our psychosis.
Yes.
It's kind of a crazy world out here. So
Mhm.
there was a limit, at least for me, to the degree to which they could help me, because they just don't understand what we deal with on a daily basis. They're really blessed to grow up with always maintaining a connection to the earth, and their spiritual sides are fed way more than ours. But overall, though, they're very welcoming to us doing this work with them. They just want us to continue to do it with reverence to the lineage and to the plants. That's what matters, not our skin color or our history or any of that.
Mm. Mm. Beautiful. So, having participated and done so much work with ayahuasca, what would you describe the experience to be like for someone who's never sat with the medicine before?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's so hard to give words to it. But
Mhm.
essentially, I mean, the way ayahuasca works, it's very similar to an extremely intense dream state. Like
Mhm.
the dream states that we have had where it feels real, but you also know it's not, like you're having an experience. In fact, they've done studies on the brain waves of people on ayahuasca, that we receive what's happening as an experience, not as someone telling us a story and imagining it, but really truly having an experience, even though we're just sitting in a room. So, you know, obviously it's an altered a state of consciousness where we see and feel ourselves in a wholly different way. The best way to describe that is it's kind of like getting an airplane view, going 30,000 feet up and being able to see yourself in a whole new way of, oh yeah, look at those relationship patterns. You know, just having things click of, oh, I know that came from when I was 3 and that thing happened with that guy. Yeah. Like we're just able to connect dots because our consciousness is expanded. We have a more expanded view of ourselves. The way that comes through is, it's very unique in each ceremony. Some of us get tons of visions and we see like the energy grid of ourselves, of the world. Some of us feel like we're literally having a dialogue with a consciousness. It could be ayahuasca. You could feel it's your higher self. Some people feel like they're talking to God. All of that is completely valid. Some people have just an inner knowing, like their feeling sense gets like heightened. The medicine really works with whatever our superhero power is. So it's very hard to describe the experience because it's all over the place. And having done it a lot, every time is different. As mind blowing as that sounds, every single time, and you know this, every single time it's totally different. Like, because we're at a different state of consciousness every single time we drink the medicine, even if it's 2 nights in a row. So the thing that we know is that it's very rarely ever what we expect it to be. The
Yes.
best thing I can say is it's not what you think it is,
Yes.
including me when I go drink the next time.
Yes.
Always going, well, I didn't see that coming, because it's true.
Right.
Like, it's very unpredictable.
Yes. And you're peeling back another layer that you couldn't have known was there before seeing it. Yeah. So, Kat, had you tried any other forms? I mean, you said self-medicating, which I think most of us are familiar with, in one way or another. But before going for ayahuasca ceremony, had you tried other forms of, sincerely helping yourself?
Well, that last part is an interesting caveat. Yes, I had done mushrooms, LSD, ecstasy, lots of different things. And I have always been in there to a certain degree of like a genuine seeker.
Yes.
But never until I met ayahuasca did I know the power of my intention to help co-create that. So basically, I was using it in recreational settings, all other substances. So I had moments of wow, like aha moments, things that felt really healing, but wasn't in a good set and setting, didn't have support to integrate it and make sense of it. So those moments didn't really dramatically or positively impact my life. They did give me the constant kind of feeling of I was still seeking that what ayahuasca ended up bringing to me, of like something in me knew that this altered state of experience could be really healing.
Yes.
I never gave that up, even though some of it ended up being traumatic outside of being in a safe setting, right? So,
Yes.
yeah, I tried lots of things,
Yep.
but yeah.
And had you tried, sort of the more conventional go-tos? Had you, I'm just out of curiosity, like, had you tried therapy? Had you tried, medication, like pharmaceutical medication, these kinds of routes?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'm still in therapy. I have an amazing therapist, and he's extremely helpful in my journey. I think that's a beautiful, well, it's a complement to plant medicine if you're called to that too. You don't have to trade one for the other.
Right.
Yeah, I've been in therapy since I was like 20, 21 years old, just because I've been very unstable. I've needed help. And then I was medicated briefly, but I just knew right away that the medication for me anyway it's not healing.
Yes.
It took away any connection I had to my authenticity, and I felt like a zombie. And so I wasn't on it very long. I knew that that was not my path. I'd
Yeah.
rather be crazy than like apathetic. That's how I felt.
Yes. And so that's fascinating. Um, that last point that you said. And so what do you feel that, after having tried those things, what do you feel that ayahuasca was able to give you that the other routes weren't?
The truth.
Mhm.
Like, she does not allow you to hide, basically. So like the medications, the pharmaceuticals, I think they're fantastic when we need a life raft. If
Mhm.
somebody's really suicidal or just really in trouble, heck yeah, let's get them to a place that's more stable. But obviously they don't cure us or solve the riddle of what we're reacting to. They just kind of create a higher base level foundations that we can function, which
Mm.
is fabulous. But I think they're used, A, too quickly, and B, too long. Like, because if you really want to heal, you can't be reliant on that crutch. So what ayahuasca does is just, I like to joke that if there's a box inside of you that says, do not look here, she's like, ooh, what's in there? Because that is precisely, the energy inside of us that's holding us back. So she gives us the experience to feel, and she doesn't give us a way out. That's the other thing that's just so amazing is when that medicine is good and strong, and she's like, you need to feel the trauma of what happened to you. No place to go. You're going to do it. You can go kicking and screaming, or you can surrender into it, but she doesn't give you an out. Whereas the ego can typically find a way out, right? But not with the medicine. So, and it can feel like torture if you receive it as such, but it's partly the way she loves us, of like, no, I'm going to help you come to terms with this, whether you like it or not. You drank the medicine. So that's
Yeah.
why it's so magical.
So in a sense, it sounds like we're kind of bypassing the ways in which we can be our own worst enemy, in terms of not looking at that which we really need to look at in order to get where we genuinely want to go.
It's a great way to put it. Yes. She helps to basically like circumvent the part of us that wants to check out. That's like, oh, because the truth is that the healing space happens when we feel. But for most of us, that's the last thing we want to do. We will distract ourselves with anything. We can't distract ourselves away from ayahuasca once we take her. And she's full throttle. She's like, and guess what? It's time to feel. There's nothing you can do about it. So that's why she's so incredibly powerful.
Mm. So we've talked a little bit about how ayahuasca um, can help us in the context of personal healing. Do you feel that that this medicine has a place in meeting our collective conundrum, such as environmental issues and our collective work? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. Because, it's all connected, right? And as we learn to treat ourselves with more love and respect, which happens through healing, which happens by releasing the traumas and the programming and the things that have gotten in the way of being our true selves and being in our hearts, basically. As we do that more and more, it's a very natural symptom that we want to extend that to ourselves, each other, and the planet. Like, we are out of alignment with her because we're out of alignment, period. And
Mhm.
so ayahuasca and medicines like her help to realign. Remember that we're all connected, we're all in this together, and this planet is waiting for us to figure that out
Yeah,
because she's been nice and patient, but we don't know for how much longer,
I know
right?
for how long. Yes. And
Yeah,
it sounds like what you're pointing to is that to create lasting change that radiates out, we really need to start with ourselves. And that one person at a time, one consciousness at a time is really the only way that we can make that real change. Is that okay?
100%. I mean, we hear this all the time in different contexts is you can't love somebody else until you love yourself.
Yes.
This is not just cliche stuff we say. It has to start from within. Otherwise, it's not sincere. And it's coming from a place that's like, well, it's just not truth to us. You know, any other motivation except for love is not love, to put it simply. So, yeah, we have to start here.
Yes. Beautiful. So, ayahuasca is still not legal, right? In some places,
Most places. Yeah.
in most places. So, what are your thoughts on the legality of ayahuasca?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, of course, it makes my heart happy to see so many places starting to open up and consider the legalization. There's several cities in America that have now decriminalized the usage and are discussing, many other cities are discussing to do the same.
Mhm.
Decriminalizing is not making it legal. It just means that you can't sell it, but you can use it in your own home or any of these substances in your own home, right? So it's a step in the right direction. And there, of course, are countries like Peru, where I do a lot of my work in Costa Rica. I do retreats in Costa Rica because it's completely welcomed. Portugal, Spain is pretty welcoming. Amsterdam, it's everywhere, And so there's plenty of places like that where you can go. But the tricky part is that as it becomes more accepted and used, there's of course more abuse the
Yes.
process. So, and of the plants, and certainly it's harder for participants to know if they're safe.
Yeah.
So, I am really in favor of having this kind of grow, but not at light speed where it feels really shaky. That's kind of what happened in the 60s. I mean, everything became popular overnight. There wasn't a strong foundation of how to work with the plants or the substances in a safe way. And so it became unsafe. And then it went away again, basically, became criminalized all over again. My cat
Yes.
says hi. And so, because of that, I'd like us to learn from that experience and to do this in a way that just keeps the responsibility on each person involved in creating safety and putting the plants back in the ground. There's plants like iboga where there's not much left. And so I don't want that to be legalized to the point that we take all of the supplies and now we're really in trouble. There's nothing left. So there's a tremendous responsibility in the usage of the plants at all, but especially in the legalization.
Yes. I love that. Thank you for bringing up those points. Is ayahuasca dangerous?
Of course.
Um,
Yeah.
and what would you describe as the risks and cautions? Um,
Well, anything that has the power to completely change our paradigm, including to help us to heal ourselves from everything from cancer to bipolar, all of it, also has the power to create that level of trauma used in the wrong context, in the wrong set and setting. So the first responsibility to anybody who is answering the call is to find a space that feels safe. Practitioners that have trained, like think of a shaman like you would a doctor. You wouldn't go to a surgeon who hadn't done med school, right? So don't go to a shaman who hasn't trained at least in my tradition, a minimum of 7 years. It was 10 years of training before I poured a single cup of medicine. So it's a really intense process to learn to do this and to make sure you're sitting with someone who's gone through that. And that you just feel safe. And also to know that you are ready. So the way that you know you're ready is, first of all, there's some physical things like any history of seizures. If you're on SSRIs or MAOIs for depression or anxiety, they don't work well with the medicine. She is an MAOI. So anybody that's on an MAOI knows you don't mix SSRIs with it. It's dangerous. Same thing's true with ayahuasca. So if you're on any like medications, a history of really high blood pressure or heart issues, all of these means that physically you're not ready for the medicine, and perhaps emotionally too. And finally, like we say it and we laugh, but if you're not ready for her to go to the parts of your consciousness that you have resistance to, maybe past traumas, things that you just don't want to look and feel, don't do it then, because she doesn't have an off switch. She's not good at being selective of, oh, maybe we'll look at this and not that. You drink her, you're basically giving her full access. And if you're not ready for that and you fight with it, it can certainly be traumatic. So there's a lot of responsibility in making sure that you're safe and that you know it's time, that you're ready to do this.
Yes. Okay. So, okay, this is my next question. Oftentimes, any kind of substance that alters our consciousness, they are all lumped together, right? So we get this classification of anything that is scheduled, any scheduled substance, right? So then we get this lump of substances that includes crystal meth and cocaine and cannabis, until recently in many places, and ayahuasca, DMT, not ayahuasca, but DMT. So how can we understand plant medicine in the context of this, right? And I guess more crudely speaking, if I were just to ask this question in a very crude way, and I'm saying this just for clarity and simplicity, how is ayahuasca different from something like crystal meth?
Oh, that's a totally fair question. It is, because if you believe the classifications given by the DEA, they're not different. But the fact that you're asking the question indicates that maybe there's more to know. So, essentially things like crystal meth and cocaine are chemically altered derivatives. Cocaine came from plant medicine, but it's altered and manipulated. There's no consciousness there anymore. It's just a pure substance. Not that that's necessarily inherently bad, but right there, it's a difference between when you work with ayahuasca, when you work with wachuma, when you work with the sacred plants, peyote, you are working with a consciousness. The way that ayahuasca has described it to me is like when you work with something like meth, it's like being in an airplane without a pilot. There's no consciousness there to guide it. So, and furthermore, then if you want to look at it on a scientific level, on the alkaloidal structure, I don't know of any studies of crystal meth that have shown any healing properties.
Right. I have not heard that either.
And I'm not saying it's not possible, but I don't know of any. It seems impossible to me because it's a very destructive drug. On the other hand, of course, ayahuasca, we know from the stories of people who've experienced it, as well as from the minimal but still significant studies that do exist out there, that they know there are healing properties to the alkaloids in this plant and the other sacred plants. I mean, for peyote, they studied it for decades of like, how can we duplicate this in a lab? And they tried. There was Merck actually had a pharmaceutical prescription for mescaline, for peyote in the 50s and 60s. So they know that there are properties in these plants that help to heal us. So, but why do they get lumped in the same classification? Well, because they're super powerful, altered spaces that the government thinks that they need to protect us from. There's a lot we could say about that, but we can leave it at that.
Yes. And I wonder also if there's something to be said for the intention where, and something to know as well, that whereas maybe oftentimes things like crystal meth are used, and I don't want to like laser on crystal meth. I mean, anything, heroin, right? Anything, but these drugs that are often used as a form of escaping from our experience, right? And maybe just to know that something like ayahuasca is not going to help us escape from our experience, as you very clearly expressed and described, it's actually going more deeply into our experience, making it more real and meeting it in a more awake way. Mm.
Super important distinction. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I know there are some substances you can use for both going in or going or escaping. Ayahuasca is not one of them. She will not let you escape the truth of who you are, what you're carrying. There is no fun times on drugs with ayahuasca. It's very,
Yes.
right? It's even funny to say that. We're like, yeah, no, that's not it.
No.
Yeah, the really sacred plants, there's no using them in the context of wanting an escape. They make us more of ourselves. That's partly why they're so healing and amazing and powerful.
Yes. Yes. So there is joy to be found. And typically it's on the other side of a lot of deep work.
Healing, feeling. Yeah.
Healing and feeling. Yes. Yes, exactly. Okay. So, um, dovetailing off of that, we've talked about this before and I love your take on it. What would you say to the concern that ayahuasca is a spiritual shortcut?
I love this question. Well, first of all, it kind of makes me laugh that such a thing would exist.
Mm,
Like, because any spiritual work, if it's real, it involves the integrity of feeling and acknowledgement of what we're carrying, the programming that kept us from ourselves. So there is no shortcut. What there is fast tracks,
yes.
like, which there's a give and take. Like, if I chose to, on my spiritual journey, to just meditate in a cave my whole life, I would come to the same conclusions that ayahuasca can grant me, but it's typically a slower process. They're both completely valid, but what ayahuasca does is just speed up the process a bit of becoming more conscious and moving the energy. Now, the trade-off of that is it's intense. It's
Yes.
a lot to take in a short period of time. So when people tell me, oh, you're cheating basically by taking this medicine, I'm like, oh yeah, you take it and tell me it's cheating. It's unbelievably difficult.
Yes.
And so we're so blessed to have choices of like, well, do I want to go a more softer, gentler ride, which even meditation can be crazy intense sometimes.
Yeah.
Typically not like ayahuasca, but it's possible,
Yeah.
But with ayahuasca, it's probable that you're going to go on one heck of a ride, multiple rides, if you use this process as part of your whole path of spiritual awakening. So that's why I get a kick out of it. The accusation of it being a shortcut. I'm like, yeah, there's nothing easy about it. It
Yeah.
may be faster, but it's intense, and that's the trade-off.
Yes. Great. Trade-off. And yes, I love what you just said, because how you touched on that even meditation can be incredibly intense, because at that point, it really seems to boil down to what we're sitting with, right? And what we have to deal with inside, the traumas, the memories, the pains, etc., things we carry ancestrally, if they are intense, then whether we're even just sitting with them without a distraction for a half hour can be incredibly intense. Yes, and then ayahuasca just really brings us into it in this other way.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Completely. Yeah.
Yes. So, what would you say to someone who's wondering if ayahuasca is beneficial for them? Um, is ayahuasca for everyone? And how do you know? Mm-hmm. So you touched
Yeah.
on this somewhat.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The first part's easy. No, definitely. She's not for everyone, for the reasons I mentioned earlier. If there's physical limitations or if you just don't feel ready. And then there's this very intangible but important factor we talk about, and that is the calling to work with her.
Yes.
Everybody that dives into this deeply, we all resonate with that of like, it's like a calling that you can't get away from.
Yes.
I mean, me, when I first heard the words, like my whole body lit up. Like, I got goosebumps. The hair on the back of my neck was like, whoa. And I had no idea what it was, but I was like, what is that? I want that. Like, something very deep within me said yes, way before my mind said yes. That is a very important piece. So for the people like that come to my ceremonies that have maybe come along with their spouse or done it because somebody else told them to, I'm like, that is not the reason. It has to be something deep within you that you're calling to it, not somebody else wanting you to do it. It's really important, because that way you know it's mutual. She's calling you, you're wanting to work with her, and that's the most important thing to have when you know that it's time. Then around the timing, I also feel like when you sign up for it, there's a flow involved to a certain degree where things just kind of line up. Everybody's got synchronicity stories too of, well, I was supposed to do it here and then this happened and all. It's just kind of, the medicine is masterful in making sure that everything aligns. And if we force it, sometimes that just means that it's us wanting it rather than it being divine timing. Divine timing is a beautiful thing to align with if we can, so yeah, that's kind of the gist of it, how to know. I know that's a bit intangible, but when you know, you know.
I love that. That's perfect. Yes, that's something that I can really say that I've experienced that as well and seen that in so many. Yeah. So, gosh, I think we're kind of we're kind of to the end of the questions that I had. Is there anything else that you feel like you want to say?
Oh, well, first of all, my instinct is to, as much as we want to emphasize the risks associated, is like, I cannot say enough about the possibilities. And that if somebody's really called to this, what I really like to emphasize is dream big. Use your power of attention. Like ayahuasca has an expression she said to me many times, that in our culture, it's not that we have an attention deficit disorder, we have an intention deficit disorder.
That's brilliant.
Clever. Yes.
Oh.
Trademark that, but no, like totally is from her. And I think what that articulates is the vulnerability we have in dreaming big. No, we're more comfortable playing small because the disappointment of not getting what we want can be really devastating. At the same time, we don't get what we want by without being vulnerable. And any time you sit with the medicine, every circle is going to tell you have intentions, right? Yes. So for those who are answering the call, I say dream big. I did, and I keep getting blown away with how she's even like, dream bigger. You would have more consciousness, more love. I'm like, okay, but it's vulnerable to say, I want to feel better. I want this. And that's the first things that she gave me, is the awareness that of course you can feel better. Of course you can. And the world had told me I couldn't, I'd be stuck with this forever. The sadness, the depression, the anxiety. Not true, turns out. So to really just play off that for people that are called is like, and at the same time, we also have to be detached for how and when that shows up, which is really difficult. Is how do I want what I want and then detach from how it manifests? It's a little bit of a whoa, but that's how this process, that's how spirituality works. That's how manifestation works, let alone with just the medicine. But to have the courage to really dig deep and say, all right, what do I want out of this? Because the more vulnerable we are with working with her, the more she can meet us in that space and help us to create the health, the love, the abundance, whatever it is that we're seeking. And I know from experience, all of it is possible working with this medicine.
Excuse me. Thank you. I'm glad we didn't leave without including that.
On a good note, right? That's how I like that.
So, I'm sorry, I'm just getting over this cold. So, my last question to my guests is always, and you already really lifted us up with what you just said. But in closing, what wisdom would you share with our listeners, whether they're called to ayahuasca or not, on how we can stay inspired, uplifted, and engaged at this time in prehistory?
And when you add at this time, right? That's like, whew,
Yeah.
this is not the easiest time to be in that space.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing I would say what America taught me is trust the process.
Okay, wonderful. So you've already really lifted us up in what you just said. And in closing, my final question to our guests is always, what wisdom would you share with our listeners on how to stay uplifted, inspired, and engaged at this time in history?
The operative words are the at this time, because that's clearly an acknowledgement that this is not an easy time to stay in a space of positivity. It's a lot going on out there. But the first thing that at least I coach myself with is to remind us all to trust the process. I love expressions like it's always darkest before the light as a reminder that this crazy shadow work that we're doing individually and as a culture is part of the process to get to a place where we are more aligned. What we were talking about before, that shadow work is necessary. Contraction, I love the word contraction because that's what a woman goes through when she gives birth.
Yeah.
That intensity that then brings life. Well, the same is true for the process that we're in right now. Contraction into shadow, but it's going to birth a better version of ourselves as individuals and a culture. If we trust that and stay in the, well, this is crazy, but everything's okay, then we can actually make the period more graceful. We can support each other through it. And so, that's how I work with it, is to know it's necessary, that it's not an accident. Nobody did anything wrong. It's just part of the process of expanding.
Yes, thank you. I love that. Where can we find you?
Oh, well, yeah. I have a blog at a website called afterlife.coach. That's my nickname, is the Afterlife Coach. So you can find me there. And I welcome questions, hellos, like all of it. You can contact me there, and it means a lot to connect with people out there and people looking for a safe place to do the medicine, things like that. I offer that for free because it's just super important that you land in good place. So if you need that help, reach out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for all you do, Kat, and for being here with us today.
Likewise, sister. Thank you so much for having me.
And that does it for part one of my conversation with the glorious Kat Courtney. So as we do with all conversations here on Lift, after we record the general episode, we also record an exclusive, more in-depth, more personal episode that you can hear on patreon.com. It is available only to our patrons. And if you don't know what Patreon is, it is a platform that allows artists and creators of all kinds to start a page and invite their community to support them by pledging as little as $1. And these pledges are steady. They are given per month or per creation that the artist releases to their patrons. And it's not just a contribution. In return, patrons receive thank you gifts, such as, in our case, these exclusive episodes of the podcast. They also we have gifts ranging from handmade journals that are designed by myself and the unparalleled visual artist, Katya Slivinskaya. And yes, two Katyas, and we collaborate on creating these gratitude journals. They are a gift. On the Patreon page, there are astrology readings with me, and much more. So please join us on Patreon. This is an amazing way to support creators of all kinds. It's sort of bringing back that old model in a revived way, where artists get supported by their communities to live their calling and keep giving the juiciest work, the most authentic work that they feel called to give to the world. They give their gifts, and you make it possible as a patron. So in this particular exclusive episode that we recorded, Kat and I dive into a juicy conversation about plant teachers versus human teachers, and why Kat doesn't really, take on human teachers so much anymore. It's, or at least not in the same way. We talk about what happens when we put human teachers on a pedestal and spiritual circles and things like this. We talk about human sexuality, and Kat gives us her take on self-care, which is completely like nothing else I've ever heard. And I've been studying self-care for a long time. I've been interested in it for a long time. And she gave me a whole new spin that I've been thinking about. It's been percolating inside of me. I love her take. And I think it's going to change the way that you approach self-care and give you a lot more freedom, but really get to the heart of what self-care is about as well. So I highly recommend this very juicy, kind of uncensored conversation that Kat and I have, and you can unlock that instantly at the $2 level or above on Patreon with your pledge. So you can also find Kat on her website, afterlife.coach. You can find her, you can contact her via her website. You can find out more information. You can sign up for her mailing list. You can find all of that on afterlife.coach. If you like this episode, please find us on iTunes, hit subscribe, and you will be informed every time a new episode is released. While you're there, if you have a few seconds to leave a rating, if you have a few more to leave a review, we would be so psyched, because ratings and reviews are what makes this podcast more visible and helps other folks who might need a lift to find us. So please do that. We'd be so grateful. And you can find, I think that's about it. I didn't say that I offer weekly astrology updates on my Patreon. If you go to Patreon and become a patron, you will receive weekly astrology updates, what is happening that following week in a video and in an article as well. I cannot wait to see you again on the next episode of Lift. We're always trying to bring juicy teachers, provocative topics, eye-opening, consciousness-opening discussions to our global family. And until next time, keep shining your light and dose yourself with plenty of amazing self-care. Stay positive, because together, I promise you, we're going to lift this reality up a little bit higher. See you next time.